Giving Tuesday is a worldwide movement each year on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving in the U.S. to inspire a day of giving, unity, and philanthropy to support causes you care about.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about, the day after Thanksgiving, generally in Casa del Ruble is Christmas decoration time.
Oh, okay.
So in a way, I'm giving a pound of flesh because that is not
That's not your scene?
Yeah, well, it's my sacrifice. Also burn off some of the calories. But yeah, there's a lot of climbing around and a lot of, hanging of the lights and putting up of the tree and all that good stuff. But I can't imagine, this is a much better way of giving and showing that support without having to potentially fall off a roof.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. And I don't think you have to do anything more than send a text. You text give to MCA to 41444 to donate. That's on Tuesday, December 2nd.
Yeah, just send the text.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably send a lot of texts that I wish I could bring back. And there are some that I'm like, why am I wasting my time with this? This is not going to be one of those.
No, this is a good text.
Yeah, if I send give to MCA to 41444, I'm going to feel pretty good about myself.
That's right. You make a good donation to support our programs.
Yeah, and this stupid phone that cost me hundreds of dollars finally is paying off.
That's right.
Yeah.
Make it worth something.
Make it worth something. Yeah, and these things, this kind of donation, this kind of support goes directly to the professional development of today's Marines, which is huge. And we've talked about how in the Marine Corps, we're really pushing for self-study, for this professional growth and development, because we don't have the same sort of churn that we had during the long war, right? And so you got to get your nose in the books. You gotta get your wargaming on. You gotta get your reps and sets somehow.
Yeah.
And by texting give to MCA to 41444, it's gonna put the tools in the hands of the people that need it the most.
And that's on Tuesday, December 2nd.
Yeah.
Giving Tuesday.
Giving Tuesday after Thanksgiving. Eat your food, stuff your belly, and then burn it off by texting give to MCA to 41444.
Sounds like a plan.
It is. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 219. This week, we welcome Ben Connable back to the show. Ben recently co-authored with Colin P. Clarke an issue brief for the Soufan Center titled War Against the Cartels. We are fortunate that he was willing to go lowbrow and come on the show to discuss it. As a former Marine intelligence officer who served during the Long War, he's a true subject matter expert and has personal experience in the perils of engaging in conflicts thought to be easy wins. Ben talks us through his threat analysis, intelligence preparation of the battlefield, second and third order effects of a potential conflict, the significance of labeling transnational criminal organizations as terrorist organizations, and recommendations for dealing with the threat of drugs, trafficking, and the fact that most of these organizations have deep roots in every major U.S. city. This is episode 219. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I continue to be Vic, much to everyone's really dismay. But I'm here with William.
Howdy, Vic.
Yeah, augmenting. You're augmenting. Everyone loves to hear your voice. Thank you for being with us. And then, again, we have Ben Connable back on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be back.
Yeah, this is great. Our last episode, if you haven't checked it out, I'll give you a minute. Okay, welcome back. But we talked a lot about obviously your life and your career and everything that came in, and then just you being sort of on the forefront of sort of military thought, strategic and policy making. And this was before you had put your commentary on force design. And then here we are now. You just released through the SOFAN, did I pronounce that right? SOFAN Center?
Soufan. Yeah.
Soufan Center, an issue brief called The War Against the Cartels with you and Colin Clarke as co-authoring this document. So can't wait to jump in, but again, thank you so much for being here. For those who didn't listen or those who didn't go back, could you just tell us a little bit about like who you are, some of your time in the Marine Corps, what you did in the Marine Corps, and then what you're doing now, just kind of a leveling exercise?
Yeah, prior enlisted, retired Marine, intel officer, Middle East foreign area officer. I was in the first Gulf War, and I did 3 deployments to Iraq, working for General Mattis, Lieutenant General Mike Gruen, and others. And then did my last tour in Jordan, and then retired. I was at the RAND Corporation for about 13 years, and then I left there, and I now have an organization we put together, nonprofit, called the Battle Research Group. We send people out into battlefields to do kind of old school, hardcore field research. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that. Website is fantastic. Nice. Really great work there. And you're currently at Georgetown, is that right? And I'm also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Yeah. Awesome. So before we actually get into the content of this, if you wouldn't mind, because I didn't really know what the term issue brief was. Like, what is it, and why would a place like Sofan Center, publish this for you guys? Like, so what was sort of the genesis behind even the project itself? So Colin is the executive director of the Sufan Center. It's a nonprofit part of a larger organization that focuses on counterterrorism. So Colin's like a full-time CT guy. I met him at the RAND Corporation, and then we've been collaborating a lot. He has me out to speak at conferences, but they are deep in the CT world, tied in with the FBI and a whole bunch of other organizations. Ali Soufan was one of the original kind of thinkers behind the name. Osama bin Laden and all the 9/11 stuff. So this is just one of the many publications that they do, and the idea is to try to jump on top of emerging issues so we can inform decision makers. And that's really what we're trying to do here, right, is get people in general thinking about this, but also to get our key decision makers, both in and out of the military, to consider the challenges of a prospective military-led operation, particularly in Venezuela and Mexico, but we could probably broaden that conversation. Okay, well let's narrow it down. So the issue brief is titled "War Against Cartels: Prospects and Perils for the Trump Administration Military-Led Campaign." You don't have to dig too far into current events to see that there's a pretty sizable buildup of U.S. forces along, the Central and South America, the Caribbean islands. We've got F-35s in Puerto Rico, and obviously through the campaign, the Trump administration had been emphasizing a lot on borders. We've heard that since 2015, and a lot of sort of rhetoric around this, enemy within, or however we want to phrase those things. So what was sort of your guys' going into this? What was your sort of IPB that you did in preparation for this, the issue brief? Look, neither one of us could claim any serious expertise on Venezuela or Mexico as countries or regional expertise. This is more instead focusing on the broader challenges at the national level of trying to conduct any kind of external operation, particularly when you get into that gray area where you hit irregular war. And, we've had military support to counter-narcotics and counterinsurgency operations in Central and South America for decades. It's ongoing. A lot of those operations are ongoing under Democratic and Republican administrations. There's nothing. You mean Tom Clancy, Clear and Present Danger, right? The whole premise of that book was that. Yeah, and there have been Marines down in places like Guatemala and elsewhere, and further south. I believe some small craft company operations. I'm sure there have been, not that I know of them directly, but signals intelligence operations, all sorts of military technical support to law enforcement-led operations against the cartels. And now we want to do a little bit of a distinction here between Mexico and Venezuela, in that when we say cartels, we really are talking about traditionally about Mexico and Colombia, where you have very entrenched organizations that are heavily financed by their own drug dealing. They have militias that are basically small military forces. They're deeply ingrained in the society, and that they pose significant threats to their own government in Mexico. And
in Venezuela, there's kind of a pale reflection of that same capability. There are gangs there. They have some cartel-like capabilities, but they don't have the same power and kind of integral connection to the United States that the Mexican cartels do. So we came at this with the idea of really exploring the challenges and concerns with shifting from military support to a law enforcement-led operation to a military-led operation.
I see. And is that the distinction then? So I just am thinking about it with all of the sort of transnational issues. And I know in another podcast you had mentioned, the seeming shift from the Pacific now into Central and South America. Why publish this in response to that build-up, Vice, focusing on Ukraine or focusing on defense of Taiwan or any of the other sort of, or, any other of the hotbed things that are going on right now? What was it about the build-up in the South that spurred you guys to want to write this?
That's a really good question. I mean, look, the U.S. military in general has been fixated on China as a pacing threat under direction of a couple of administrations. We are rightly fixated to some extent on Ukraine because it's the largest conventional war in town.
Sure.
But we have had to take some risk when it comes to irregular warfare and what a lot of people would call lesser included cases. However, if you look back traditionally, over about the past 3 centuries, about 80% of wars are what we would term irregular wars. So the likelihood of us getting tied into or stuck into another irregular war, we already have Marines and soldiers in many irregular wars. We often forget that. But really a high-profile, really heavily engaged operation is pretty high. And so we're looking here at the warning signs. They're glaring warning signs that we're about to get involved in another large-scale irregular war, possibly a counterinsurgency operation. And we have jettisoned a lot of our training capabilities, a lot of our probably physical capabilities, certainly the mindset to execute those operations successfully, yet they're looking increasingly likely. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve here. Perhaps this is all bluff. Perhaps this is a lot of bluster. But we don't have that. Military professionals don't have that luxury.
Right.
Guys like Cal Worth, who leading the new Joint Task Force, don't have the luxury of guessing as to whether or not this is a serious threat.
Right.
And so I believe, and I think Colin believes this as well, is that as anybody in the professional field, retired Marines, people who are still active, former Marines, we all need to try to help the Marine Corps and our nation succeed at whatever it is that we're going to do. So if we're going to go into Venezuela, we're going to go into Mexico, we need to really think through the challenges here and help tee up our leaders and our Marines for success.
Right. Like no one enters into the rehearsal phase going, but this is all for show. Right.
Yeah.
And I think when you had first, when we had first began talking about you coming on, I think your insight was really profound in that we can sort of wave the magic wand and say, oh, this will be a drone fight, or this will be an aerial campaign, or this will be a soft thing. But the reality of it is the Marines always have some role to play, and generally speaking, doctrinally within our first 96 hours of any campaign, it's all Marine Corps.
Yeah, and Marines are front and center here,
right?
I mean, Marines are leading the task force. Marines are afloat right now. I don't know the full disposition of all Marine assets, pointed towards Venezuela and Mexico, but certainly we're going to be involved.
Yeah.
And if it's just aerial to begin with, that's one thing. The concern here is that airstrikes alone are not going to break up the cartels. They are not going to stop, and they may only barely slow the flow of narcotics from Mexico and or Venezuela into the United States. As long as that demand for drugs is there, you can't just bomb from the air and take care of this problem. We've learned that in multiple previous campaigns. And we don't get to pick the war that we want to fight. And I think that's a lesson that we periodically lose as we get further and further away from major engagements. We did not decide that we were going to fight a major war in Vietnam. We just did not plan on spending 20 years in Afghanistan. We did not plan on occupying Iraq for an extended period of time. And you can go on and on and on. But we certainly didn't plan on getting our barracks blown up in Lebanon, right?
Right.
And so no matter what we think might happen when we start killing people in Venezuela and or Mexico, and by the way, possibly Haiti and possibly Colombia as well, we have to assume that it's going to get out of hand and it's not going to follow the path that we think it might right at the outset, which, by the way, as it's being described in public at the moment, is wildly optimistic.
Right. As it normally is, right? Like we talked before we even started recording, like, harken back to 2003 and President Bush landing on a aircraft carrier with a big banner that says "Mission Accomplished," right? Like we have, like, the one thing you can guarantee is that we will smell our own farts and like the stench, right?
Yeah, and you can go back now too and look at the planning for Afghanistan. That was, then Secretary Donald Rumsfeld published a lot of the notes and the documents. I think it's still up online. He had a website like donaldrumsfeld.com or something like that. But you can actually go back and see the thought process in writing. And it was just kind of like, we'll go in there, we'll kill everybody, we'll overthrow the Taliban, and then we'll pull the cord and we're out of there, with no anticipation or thought about what came next, no real consideration for the aftermath of the operation, no real thinking about second and third order effects. Now, look, I am fully supportive of that operation to take down the Taliban. We had to go after Osama bin Laden. I'm not saying it shouldn't have been done. But we should all be adults here and professionals and look back and point fingers at our own operations and say, here's where we made mistakes. Here's where we have an opportunity to learn and improve upon what we did, whether it's Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan or any other operation. Let's take a cold, hard look at that. And the cold, hard look tells us that we are like you said, we're overly optimistic. We do a poor job thinking through or planning, and we assume a lot of things away. And that's not just, by the way, that's not just an American problem. You can look at the Russians in Ukraine. You can look at the French in Indochina, and so on and so forth.
Sure. Before we dive too much, I guess getting back to the IPB question, what in your analysis as you're entering into this thing did you see as the threat? Like, what is it that the administration is doing in the maneuvering of forces that, I guess what was the enemy threat that necessitated the shifting of not just strategic focus, but actually the movement of forces?
Right. Anytime anybody outside the green door has that conversation, we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of things that we don't know. Right. That there are intel professionals doing this full time, and they know much more.
In much more secure facilities than the Marine Corps Association building.
And with much better access to sources. Right. And then once they turn the national collection assets towards this problem, and they build up task forces and working groups inside the intel community, these people are on it. So I say this with that caveat in place, in that what we're really in very general terms, we're looking at the Venezuelan armed forces, and I'll get back to why in a second. The militia organization and command and control structures of Nicaragua and other similar organizations. I hesitate to call them cartels, but we can do that in Venezuela. And then in Mexico, where we are officially partnered with the Mexican state, we need to discriminate between them, Mexican police, and then the very robust and well-armed Mexican cartels. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that while the Venezuelan military is probably out in the open, you can see their assets, their physical assets, you know where their barracks are, you know where their command and control facilities are. That may be less true for irregular forces. And by the way, less so in Venezuela, more so in Mexico, particularly in Mexico, these guys have been fighting and killing each other for decades, and they've been fighting their own state for decades. They've become really adept at camouflaging and preserving their command and control network, really adept at ensuring that their drug production and distribution networks are redundant and that they can keep them going even when they get hit. They're used to taking losses. They're used to sacrificing people. So you have this very kind of straightforward Venezuelan military problem on the one hand, but the far more complex and I would argue far more dangerous calculation is when you start going after the irregular operation, the regular enemies. And then the last point here is we have to be careful not to brush the pro-Maduro sentiment under the rug here, and that he has publicly now told Venezuelans to be ready to go into the hills and fight if the government is overthrown. We have a $50 million price tag on his head. The chances of us, once we put boots on the ground, I think the chances of us going after him personally are really high, and I'm pretty sure he believes that as well. So the idea of a dispersal of pro-Maduro forces into an insurgency, it makes a lot of sense to me. No guarantee it'll happen. But I really recommend to everybody, go to Google Maps, open a map up and take a look at Venezuela. And just look at the terrain. Look at the density of the urban terrain along the coastline, and then look at how it spreads up into the mountains.
Well, it's like triple canopy jungle.
It's really bad. Yeah. And even the Venezuelans have very little idea what's going on in those mountains. So, and then you've got Colombia across the border, which I'd be happy to talk about.
Sure. Well, I think it all comes into it because I think one of the problem sets that maybe folks aren't fully aware of is that even when we were laser focused on a specific region, be it Iraq or Afghanistan, even in the counter ISIS fight, in Syria, northern Iraq, the complexity of trying to do, so we did, we had multiple campaigns overlapping, as you know, I, others that we know would often just seesaw between Iraq and Afghanistan during the long war. You do a tour over here and then you go do a tour over there. But the one thing about it was the geography allowed you to still sort of mass forces and stay focused on that. If you're talking about basically everything around the Gulf and you're just going to treat that as a single campaign, that seems unbelievably complicated, thus problematic. Would you agree with that? Because you've already distinguished that, hey, how we would treat a Mexican campaign would be very different from how we would treat a Venezuelan campaign, which would be very different than, say, Haiti, which would be obviously different than Colombia, which we actually had success, but only over generations and generations of working with the Colombian government. Am I stating that correctly?
Through the Colombian government, right?
Right.
And again, we go back here to the premise of over optimism, in that we're saying, we're just going to bomb from a distance. How many times have we heard that in our own history? We're just going to bomb from a distance, and we'll solve the problem that way. You're far more likely to trigger further problems. So keep in mind, as I go back to that point about complexity, one of the points we raised in the paper here is the idea of horizontal escalation. And that, in particularly the Mexican cartels, if we start going after their infrastructure and taking down their leadership, which, by the way, we identified in the January 20th, I believe in the first version of the executive order, naming them as a foreign terrorist organization.
Right. I want to talk about that, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to go after their command and control nodes and after their so that was plainly stated months ago. The idea of horizontal escalation is real, and that we are not prepared for the cartels to start attacking stadiums and shopping malls and buses in El Paso or anywhere else. And so that is one potential concern here, is that the balloon gets pushed over.
Because there's already roots of these organizations in the continental United States.
Robust. And our law enforcement. I mean,
hell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, here in Northern Virginia, there's a pretty large contingent of MS-13, correct? Yes. I mean, isn't that it's a deal, right?
Right. And the argument, look, I mean, I'm not averse to doing something about the cartels. I'm not averse to fighting them or reducing the amount of drugs flowing into this country. I think a lot of people are confusing criticisms or concerns with the way that we're approaching the campaign with aversion to doing anything at all. I'm not, right? I mean, I see the impact of drug use. I understand the challenge here. And, absolutely there's something to be done. My only argument is, let's be smart about it, and let's think through the consequences, and let's think through the complexity. Let's accept it. Let's not pretend that it doesn't exist. And so let's just think about Venezuela alone on the complexity scale here. You've got a standing government that is at least somewhat popular, where there are probably at least 1 million, if not more, people that are so heavily dependent upon Maduro as a person for their livelihood. They get paid, right? They're part of the patronage system, that they may stay loyal even after he's overthrown. So now you've got a government you're fighting, and then potentially government insurgency. Now you've got the Trinidad, and there's another gang there. Now you're fighting them. You're going after their command and control nodes in complex urban terrain. By the way, amongst populations of which we know very little. And I'm sure there are experts on Venezuela informing our government experts, informing Marines. They're probably sitting at Camp Lejeune right now talking these things through. But that doesn't translate down to the sergeant, lieutenant, captain level immediately. We learned that in Iraq and Afghanistan, right?
Sure did.
So who am I talking to? Yeah, I got guys that speak Spanish, but this guy speaks Mexican Spanish.
But to say, my very first interpreter during the invasion was Egyptian. That joker didn't do shit for us because they didn't speak the standard Arabic.
No,
right?
I had a guy that only spoke Arabic and German, and then I had a Marine who spoke German and English. We had to do a 3-way translation. Not terribly effective. So, but that doesn't magically impart on the Marines. And so now you've got Marines operating in complex human terrain, potentially if they go on the ground, and that's an if. Where they're trying to understand who's who, they're trying to understand equities, they're trying not to alienate the population. They have no assets now from the aid side to help because we've dismantled our aid infrastructure. We're going to have to rebuild that probably if we want to stay there and own part of Venezuela, which I think is a possibility. Again, not a guarantee, but a possibility. And now you've also got to deal with the lawlessness in the mountain areas. And Colombian gangs and narco terror militias are already infiltrated into Venezuela. The chances are really good if we overthrow the Venezuelan government that becomes an open zone. And so now we're dealing not just with Venezuelans, but also with illicit Colombian
power vacuum.
Yeah. And now we got to figure all that out. And then the terrain gets worse, right? And so when was the last time Marines operated in triple canopy jungle, mountainous triple canopy jungle? It's been a while. We did mountains in Afghanistan, and I've talked with plenty of folks, and I've seen the terrain up close. I mean, anybody that operated in Kunar, Nuristan, so on and so forth, they'll tell you firsthand they had no idea what was going on in even in the denuded mountain areas. Now, God forbid you put triple canopy on that.
Right.
So the terrain itself becomes extraordinarily complex. That's just Venezuela. Now, we haven't even gotten into Mexico yet.
Right.
And in Mexico, the complexity increases even further, because if we are working at least with the permission of and in concert with the government, that government is so badly penetrated by the cartels, and certainly the local police are badly penetrated, you wouldn't know who to trust if you start putting troops on the ground.
Right.
And you can go on and on and on, right?
Sure.
And so your point about complexity is absolutely right.
Well, you talk about part of your conclusion is what you suggest you could do is working with, especially in the Mexico case, with and assisting them. But are they a reliable enough partner where that would be effective?
The Mexican government?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are people within the Mexican government that want to be reliable partners, and they are just so badly penetrated by the cartels and under so much threat that, at least to date, they have not been terribly effective and reliable. Do I have an answer for that? We propose in the article, hey, look, keep this a law enforcement led operation. I'll put a caveat on that, at least until we think through this military thing in a lot more detail. But ideally, we would try to replicate what we did in Colombia. And we had a much better partner in Colombia than we do in Mexico, right? The Colombians led the success that they had against the FARC, which, by the way, is dwindling at the moment, with a tremendous amount of support from us, right? And it was a financial support. We gave them Black Hawk helicopters to get into the remote areas, right? They have their own geographic and triple canopy jungle problems. We gave them a lot of moral support by being there with them as partners, giving them intelligence support. So there are more robust military things you can do to help a reliable partner. What do you do with a less reliable partner, like the Mexicans? Well, I mean, maybe we think hard about making them into a more reliable partner. How do we provide their leaders with the kind of security that they need to make difficult decisions? there's no easy way out of this one. But the answer is not just to kind of run headfirst into it because we feel like we have to do something.
Yeah, and I definitely annotated that on the side margins as I was reading through this. Is that there's this sentiment and sort of what you've outlined in the article doesn't give the big feels, but it is the more measured, cautious, calculated response. But when people, and the other issue about it too is, and this is where one of the things I was asking about with the threat thing is that you hear a lot about fentanyl being this, problem that's polluting America, that's eating us up, and which is a real thing. I'm not trying to discount it, but it doesn't seem like this campaign would address the fentanyl issue.
In Venezuela, no.
Yeah.
And I think that's broadly understood. I'm not a DEA intel analyst,
Right.
so I can't tell you the exact points of flow and all that kind of stuff. Look, I go up to Truxtun Circle in D.C., and I see the impact of fentanyl. You see people laying on the street.
Sure.
I had to step over a naked guy with my kid one time because we had to get through a crowd. Well,
you hear the horror stories about it being in vape pens and stuff too, right?
I mean, it's really bad.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. I don't think the argument that going into Venezuela or even bombing Venezuela from a distance is going to affect fentanyl flow into the United States. I say that as a partially informed, somewhat subject matter expert on the problem. So I'll leave it up to others to make that case, but I have not seen a robust case made for that in public. I think that really feeds into a bigger problem here. And we mentioned this in the article. If you're going to go to war, you need to prepare the American public to go to war. You need to get people on board. You have to Americans are fickle. Right? We are not going to stick with you if you don't tell us what's happening. You fail to set expectations at the outset. You don't say, hey, look, we're going to be in Afghanistan for 20 or maybe even 50 years. If somebody had the guts to say that in 2002 or 1 and said, hey, this is a 50-year problem, we'll keep it low key, we'll keep casualties low, but we're going to be here indefinitely.
Yeah, you have to garrison, like Romans, right? Like you got to garrison.
Well, like South Korea, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We're not setting expectations. We have no clear evidence-driven message here. Think back to 2003 when Colin Powell went in front of the UN and presented all the evidence that the Iraqis had a weapons of mass destruction program, and it turned out that a lot of that hinged on a bad human intelligence source.
Tubes,
and look, I was part of the intel community at that point. I saw a lot of the evidence. I thought from my perspective, it was fairly convincing. I'm not sure I would have pulled the trigger on an invasion, but we all went there anyway. Turned out not to be accurate. It wasn't as inaccurate as people were saying, but especially because of Curveball, and some of the listeners will be old enough to remember who Curveball was the source upon which a lot of this decision making hinged, and it turned out he was not telling the truth.
Just such an ironic name to have.
Yeah, I know, really bad. Yeah, poor choice. So the question here is, where is the evidence? Where be transparent with the American people. Set expectations, set reasonable expectations, let them know, hey, this is not something we fix. We're not going to end the drug flow into the United States as long as there's a demand for drugs. If we overthrow the Maduro regime, which we have a $50 million price tag on his head, that seems to be our intent. This is not going to be a problem that goes away overnight. Even if he's overthrown, that doesn't solve all of the Trinidad problems. So we're going to be in this for the long haul. We may have to put boots on the ground. This is the kind of discussion that we need to have. And then what that does is it brings in the expert community. It brings in political opponents even. I mean, if you remember after 9/11, everybody came together and the Democrats and Republicans were singing.
Sure.
I can't remember which song they were singing. Wasn't the...
Was it the Proud to be American?
Yeah, no.
Oh.
It was a... spacious. Yeah, right. The Purple Mountains Majesty one. All singing that together on the steps of the Capitol. If you are clear with people and you have a clearly perceived and unified threat, you can bring people together and you can actually have a successful military operation. If you dissemble and you fail to set expectations, you set yourself up for failure.
So based off of what you're just saying, you're already based on the current social political climate in the United States that conditions already failed, even with such a pressing issue as the drug issue.
I don't know about that. I mean, just if there was a straightforward conversation, look, I mean, it doesn't matter how we feel about the president or about his opposition. If we're going to put Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen in harm's way, and the decision is made, then we all want them to be successful as long as the operation is legally, ethically, and morally conducted. And so if you tell me that there's a legal, ethical, and moral justification to do these things, and even if I disagree with you and you make the call and we're putting guys in harm's way, I will do whatever I can to make sure that the Marines get what they need. Being a little partisan here, right?
Yeah.
But the Marines and everybody else, they get what they need. You'll win me over, even if I happen to disagree with any of your other policies or don't like you or whatever it is, because that's what Americans do. And if you fail to do that, if you don't put any effort into it, if you lazily anticipate that we're just going to all blindly follow and think this is a great idea, you're going to generate antibodies that wind up actually undermining your operation after it is kicked off.
When we talked a little bit before we started recording also that this is why I'd like your, I mean, no kidding, experience firsthand is the people who are on the ground, boots on the ground, regardless of where you may fall politically, aren't going into this thing wanting to fail. Everybody is giving their absolute everything they can to make every operation a successful operation, and yet it's still, you get bogged into a quagmire. It's not like you're ignoring all of the all of the possibilities, and you're just so laser focused on this one uber optimistic sort of outcome. You're considering everything that could be I mean, you're up at late at night. You're not sleeping. You're concerned about the safety of the Marines to the left and right of you. You want to succeed with your every fiber, and yet you still have a hard time with that. Can you talk a little bit?
And,
I think
look, we're all victims of our own experience to some extent, right? So I hate to keep going back to my personal experience, but it will resonate with a lot of the listeners because they had the same or similar experience. I mean, and I draw back particularly to the 01 to 03 period where we were all leaping into this with both feet. We got attacked. We've got to do something. We're going to fight. We're going to war. I mean, anybody that watched 9/11 happen on TV or in person, you still get goosebumps thinking about it, and just your gut flips over because you're angry. And there was that momentum that we all built on, and there was an incredible sense of professionalism and kind of, I will argue, also a little bit more of a risk-taking culture in that period, and we all dove in head first. Like guys, there were colonels slept on their couches at headquarters. Yeah, dudes slept on their cots. You hid under your desk. You did a Costanza and you hid under your desk, right? I mean, this is we were all in. We deployed over and over and over again because we were not, like you said, we're not going to fail. We're going to succeed. We're going to make this happen. Even as it became clearer and clearer that this was way more complicated than we had anticipated, and the chances of outright success were not what we thought they were. You're right. I have no doubt that there are Marines, sailors, and again, I'll keep it focused on the joint task force here that are staying up all night, trying to learn as much as they can about Venezuela, trying to learn they're poring over maps, they're doing a course of action analysis and trying to nail down what's the best way to get guys on the ground. What happens if a soft team goes in and gets rolled up, and we have to send in a rescue company to go get them, and we're in deep urban terrain. What does that look like? How do we resupply those guys? What's the air support? Right, all those things are ongoing. Here's the challenge. Here's one of the reasons that we still screw that up. One is war is uncertain. Can't change that. You can reduce it by hard work and surveillance, right? Okay, put that aside. The second one is that if you've been disconnected from the military, I'd always have to remind myself how complex and difficult even the simplest things are in a military operation. Just getting people from point A to point B for a movement can consume all of your entire life, right? And so the idea of getting everybody moving, by the way, also making sure you're clean and you have the stuff that you need, all your Marines are okay, something's going to go wrong, a vehicle's going to break, before you even get to the complexity of the human terrain. And that's why, it takes everybody else doing this together. I think one of the best examples to think back to is 2002, 2003. We had ORHA, Organization for Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance, I believe. If I got that wrong, I apologize. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people helping to prepare the U.S. military for the post-invasion Iraq scenario, and getting people in place to do all the things that they needed, getting aid and help, thinking about the rebuilding Iraq, so on and so forth. And that was downplayed. And so a lot of the work that was put into that ahead of time was kind of jettisoned, and we did a really poor job of it. Happy to give you examples, but I don't see that happening right now. That was an all hands on deck operation, right? There were members of the civilian expert community that were actively engaged in getting military people smarter and offloading some of that burden that you just can't carry it all by yourself. Yeah.
All right. So if you don't think we're ready, I just want to. You didn't really touch on it too much in your article, so I want to hear more of like your personal opinions. What was the rationale then from going from primary law enforcement mission to then transitioning more towards military? Like at least what do you think from the perspective of the current administration? Like why do you feel that step from law enforcement military
why not lean
necessary?
more into the law enforcement aspect?
Precisely.
Of it?
I think there's a sense of frustration that we were not solving the problem, and in fact that it was getting worse. For a variety of reasons. And I think that there's an inclination to view military force as expedient. And law enforcement operations are, by their very nature, not expedient. They're gradual, methodical, small footprint. They generally have an uncertain outcome. You're building up a court case. So that's very different than going in and killing people. And I think I would say it is a mistaken belief that just going in and killing people tends to solve problems.
Well, we saw that. I mean, even as late as Fallujah. The whole reason why we gave everybody 72 hours to clear out was because we fully understood that for every insurgent that you kill, actually no shit insurgent, you're building two more because that dude's got brothers or uncles or whomever who. So I mean, it's Hydra. You're fighting the Hydra,
and especially if you don't take into consideration the civilian factor here, and we dismiss things like, okay, nobody is going to come out, I don't think, publicly in the lead up to this and say we're going to go into Venezuela. In order to install democracy, there is what I would argue is probably a more legally elected leader that is not in power at the moment. I think you could come up with a decent rationale to say that person should be in power. I think given all the other things that are going on in the world and all the other policies of this administration, it would not go over terribly well to make that argument because it would be hard to put in context. But let's say you did that. Then you're making a commitment there. You're saying, okay, we're going to do a military-led operation. There's a reason for us to apply a Title X action here. We're going to overthrow the Venezuelan government. We're going to get the rightly elected government in place. And then I guess you would make an argument also to benefit from Venezuelan oil. I think there are serious legal, ethical, and moral issues with that. I also think there are practical issues with making that come to pass as well. But let's say that's the rationale. I haven't seen any of those substantive arguments at all. So when it comes to motivation for doing this, it just feels like a feeling more than a thought.
Just do something. That kind of that zeitgeist of just do something.
And this is speculative, but it's derived from from listening to leaders in the administration, including the Secretary of our Armed Forces, whichever term you want to use for our current the whatever's happening in the Pentagon there. So there's a belief that because we used restrictive rules of engagement in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, that we failed in Afghanistan, and we kind of half failed in Iraq because we didn't let people we didn't let the dogs out. We didn't let them kill with impunity. And I think there's a mistaken belief that if we just let people kill wildly, and in some cases illegally, and there's been direct mention of that by the secretary, just kind of focusing less on legality, that will solve the problems. You can kill your way to success, whatever that would look like, and I don't think that holds up.
Well, that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting statement, because one of the big things that I continue to sort of dwell on, and that racks my brain from our experiences was, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, William, is that there's this idea of lethality, right? Being lethal is sort of the term du jour right now within the Pentagon, and I take a little umbrage with it because I'm like, fuck, we've always been lethal. We had no lethality issues when I was in uniform. We could kill motherfuckers with the best of them, the best at doing it. The problem we had was translating that tactical success into strategic victory, right? That's where I feel like we couldn't solve the quagmire of the long war. But as far as like us being lethal, oh, fuck yeah, we were very lethal.
Well, I guess my question to you is there instances of a counterinsurgency working without the use of extreme authoritarian violence?
I don't know. I saw it, and granted, I was there. The various ebbs and flows in my time, and I know that you have saw all of it. But there was a time. It was like there's a time to kill, and then there was a time to not. And I was most times, as part of surges, sort of either on the front end or the back end of those things. And so there was the time where like Fallujah, like we're gonna cordon off this, and then you get 72 hours. Whoever's left is a shithead, and you're all going down. And then there was the other time where like, we got to be very careful about PID, positive identification, and making sure we are doing this by the numbers, because every time we kill somebody, we're potentially creating 2 or 3 more bad guys that are going to want to come after us. And so there was this, hey, gloves are off, it's on. And then there was a time where it was like, hey, let's slow it down a little bit, and let's actually, maybe if we get an Iraqi face or Afghan alongside us, it gives us more legitimacy in that.
Well, legitimacy
more kinetic.
To the local population, or to like people back at home supporting the war effort, or both?
I guess both. It's legitimacy for the host nation and the people that are around, because if they see Afghans alongside you or Iraqis alongside you, then when you happen to kill an insurgent Iraqi or whomever, then you can say, well, that was a combined operation. It wasn't just the Americans doing American things. And then back home, I don't know. I don't know if that's a little stickier.
Yeah, a couple
maybe.
of points.
Okay.
No, I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
And from the back home, I'll come back to the trends in counterinsurgency, but from a restricted use of force point, the killing of civilians, especially the intentional killing and torture of civilians, has never gone over well with the American public. If you look at the reaction to My Lai in Vietnam,
Abu Ghraib,
and if you look at that was the next point, right? And if you look at the American reaction to Abu Ghraib was I think it correlated with a decrease in support for the war, and it correlated with an increased political opposition in the United States to the war. So killing, murdering civilians, torturing people tends not to pay off in practical or particularly in strategic terms. And then it certainly doesn't play well with the Iraqis. I interviewed plenty of Iraqi insurgents, and some of them told me, point blank, I am here because of Abu Ghraib, because I saw those pictures of what you did to people, and humiliating American woman, humiliating Iraqi men, making them act like a dog. I mean, everything wrong you could think about doing. We did it, and then the photos got out. If you're not familiar with Abu Ghraib, you can do a quick Wikipedia search and get the gist of it. But that incident and incidents like it almost always backfire. Now, in terms of what work, can you defeat an insurgency just by killing everybody without the use of kind of some balanced and approach, and without trying to build legitimacy and win people over to your side? I teach and I taught counterinsurgency and insurgency at Georgetown for about 8 years, and I wrote a book with a colleague of mine, Martin Libicki, called How Insurgencies End, and we looked at 89 cases, coded cases of insurgency, counterinsurgency. There was only one case that I refer back to where extreme violence was used without real consideration for the population. That was the Sri Lanka case. And this was after, I think it was 30 years of really violent, I mean, if you're not familiar with Sri Lanka, really violent conflict. And the insurgents had morphed into phase 3, Maoist phase 3. They had their own Navy, they had their own Air Force, they were using suicide bombers, and in fact, they are widely given credit for popularizing the suicide bombing belt. And they carried cyanide around, in pills or in necklaces, and they cornered them after years and years of fighting, and then just slaughtered them. And 200,000 people from the immediate fight were displaced, and they mistreated everybody. They did defeat the Tamil Tigers, but there are so many idiosyncrasies with that case. If you look at every other case of counterinsurgency, the clear trend is that if you're going to be successful at this, and there's not a high chance of success, you have to build legitimacy. You have to do the things that we taught ourselves to do from all of the collective lessons that we had drawn together in FM 324. There are a lot of flaws with that document, but the general concept of thinking about this in long term, applying legal means, applying ethical decision-making, and trying to build something rather than just destroy everything is really important. Could we go in, slaughter a whole bunch of people in Venezuela, and then leave? Yeah, we could. I don't know how that would accomplish a strategic objective other than to create instability in Venezuela, which would then lead to the growth of more criminal organizations, which would then likely increase the flow of drugs. So again, I want to just see the logical pathway here.
Yeah. Man, this has been, my brain hurts a little bit. I'm just looking over some of my notes here. One of the things I did want to talk to you a little bit is the designation of these transnational criminal organizations to terrorist organizations, and we hear a lot of rhetoric of making parallels with Al Qaeda. I personally, World According to Vic, I think that is oversimplified. Because whereas like the Taliban in particular had many inroads with these transnational criminal organizations, that was one of their main funding streams, they still had that ideology. And yes, the crime paid for the $50 to give to the dude to dig the hole, and then another $50 to the guy to put the IED in, and another $50 to the guy to, so they could do those IED sort of sell things that they were doing on the cheap, and that funded a lot of stuff, gave them the guns and all that other. But they had that ideology that was really hard to uproot. It seems in a way that if we take the ideology out of the designation of a terrorist organization and we overlook the business part, that there is something that we will then lose in understanding what it is that the enemy, like what their fucking raison d'etre is.
Yeah.
Right? Am I
excellent pronunciation.
Okay, thank you.
The amateur French. Okay. So, you're dead on, and I don't see any logical justification for it other than it frees up opportunities to apply Title 10 to the problem and more Title 50 operations, so covert operations, which we're apparently doing. Not always the best idea to announce your covert operations on TV, but okay, that's neither here nor there. So the decision doesn't have any kind of clear pathway to it. I think the rationale has been really thin. I agree with you in terms of ideology. If you took drugs away and just said drugs don't exist anymore, these are just local gangs operating in Mexico and Venezuela. Right. They have no reason to hate Americans or do anything to Americans.
Yeah, the Crips and Bloods in Los Angeles.
They are hurting Americans because they're using us to make money, and we are gleefully buying up everything that they're selling us. Right. So they are by every definition transnational criminal organizations. I don't see anything that differentiates them or distinguishes them as terrorist organizations. I haven't seen a wave of terrorist operations conducted in the United States with the intent of overthrowing the government or changing American political opinion. I don't. They do use terror operations in Mexico in order to change the opinion of the Mexican government, just basically, though, to allow them to do what they want to do. There's a real interesting category in an old U.S. government manual on insurgency and counterinsurgency, and it's one that I would teach, and I would highlight it for my students because it was so hard to pin down. It's called a commercialist insurgency. And, what do you mean a commercialist insurgency? Well, it's an insurgent group, but really all they want to accomplish is to carve out space for themselves to make money. And so you could make a strong argument that the Zetas cartel, is a commercialist insurgency in that they're refusing government control, they're undermining government control with the sole purpose of enriching themselves. That does not make them a foreign international terrorist organization. And by FTO, right, we're really saying FITO, right, in that they would have an intent to hurt Americans for ideological purposes. And I agree with you. I don't see it.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about this in perspective of the drug war, but let's talk about it just real quick in terms of great power competition, because obviously
nice.
that has to play into this as well, and the fact that our adversaries are observing the actions that we're taking and gleaning lessons from them, and we, particularly Mexico, maybe less so with Venezuela. I mean, China is directly involved with getting fentanyl in the United States. Prior to 2019, they were actually able to just ship it pretty much over straight, but then they changed some law, and now it's either sent to Mexico or it's synthetically made in Mexico. There's actually even instances of certain cartels, synthetic versus shipped in, fighting each other, and then doing hits even in the United States. What does I guess the current administration's response and elevation to a military issue rather than just solely civil? How does that play into great power competition? What do you think our adversaries are observing from this?
So that is a great question, and look, we're speculating to some extent here. Clearly, fentanyl's a major problem. Clearly, the fentanyl precursors are a major problem. The administration, I think, has rightly identified the fentanyl problem as a threat to American stability. They have rightly identified the Chinese shipments of fentanyl precursors as I don't know if it's not an act of war, but it's a hostile act. It clearly seems to be intentional on the part of the Chinese government. So doing something about that in a logical, thoughtful way as part of a larger strategy to counter Chinese influence would make a great deal of sense to me. I don't know how Venezuela fits into that, given the location of the fentanyl precursors and where they're shipped. Mexico makes a little bit more sense. Here's the other side of that. So again, I don't have a clear answer for you, but at least in the fentanyl precursor thing, there's some rationale, and I just want to see more evidence, and I want to see a logical, thoughtful description of how these things line up and how that fits within our China strategy. Here's the other thing too. And this is pure speculation. I have no idea if this is true. I don't think anybody outside of the highest levels of the Chinese government would know if this is true. But wouldn't the Chinese be highly incentivized to try to draw off our military forces into other parts of the world and weaken our ability to respond to a prospective invasion of Taiwan? I think the answer to that, logically, again, without evidence, would be yes. And so if you saw the United States drawing, perhaps, let's say we go into Venezuela, rough estimate, I think it was either IISS or somebody else did a calculation would be 50,000 people to seize and occupy Venezuela. I think it would take a lot more than that over time. Let's say we tie down 5 divisions out of our 10 active divisions in Venezuela. Does that undercut our ability to respond to an invasion of Taiwan? We have the largest assembled flotilla of U.S. Navy ships. I think it's like 20% of our float combat power tied down to this operation. Absolutely, it diverts us from what the Chinese actually want to accomplish. So I don't, again, no proof of that.
Right. But even if it's not part of some grand, if it's not part of their like Belt and Road Initiative, they are opportunists like anybody would be, right? So, I mean, even if it wasn't part of a major strategy, you would still see the gap starting to form. And
Well, I mean, they put us in a double bind in the sense where we do nothing, they continue to erode American health, and I mean
that's true.
And don't just think about the Chinese here. Think about the Russians too. So go back and look. And I'd be happy to give you something you can post up on the link here about Russian activities in Venezuela and Nicaragua, and that the Russians were making significant inroads into our hemisphere. Have a long-standing relationship.
Well, that was the whole Contra Sandinistas thing, right? Back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. And Cuba, don't forget Cuba, of course, right? The very strong, enduring relationship with the Cuban government. Cuban troops being used all over Africa and other places on behalf of the Soviets. But in this case, the Russians had direct links with the Venezuelans and with the Maduro government. There was even talk about the Russians sending troops at one point. There were a couple of hundred Russian, probably mercenaries, on the ground in Venezuela at one point. So the Russians also potentially see an opportunity to let us get drawn into something that's going to force us to expend our dwindling stock of precision munitions, which obviously has a direct impact on their forces in Ukraine. Again, pure speculation, but I think those are important things to consider if we're talking about how this affects great power competition and our ability to prosecute what I think what we all agree would be the more dangerous wars.
Right. Is there any sense, and I'll close with this, is there any sense of our Pacific, our allies in the Pacific, Australia, Japan, Philippines in particular, who are kind of on the front of at least the gray zone conflict part of our counter or our Pacific focus? Is there any sense of their like, hey, Whiskey Tango Fox guys, like what's happening? Or like, is there any pressure from our allies in the Pacific to not do this thing?
That would be completely out of my bailiwick. I have no idea. But I mean, it would be good to bring on someone who's like 3MEF embedded for that to answer that question. But it's a good one.
Okay. Well, I'll drop the microphone there then before I put my foot in my fucking mouth. Well, Ben, this has been so good. My head hurts, but you're the balm, man. This is so good. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for writing this piece and for sharing it with us. And is there a way to get hold of this so we can put it?
Free PDF link online the Soufan Center website.
Okay, cool. I'll link that in the show description. But yeah, again, thank you so much for talking this through with us.
Yeah, man, anytime. Yeah. Great to be here.
Hey, Vic, I got a little known fact for you.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Did you know that I like to shoot skeet?
I did not know that.
Yeah. I'm really bad at it, but I think it's pretty awesome. I probably could use a little practice.
Yeah, I did it once. When I was a battalion XO, my CO was huge into it. And so he would take us clay shooting, and I fell in love with it. I only done it once. It was only that one time, but it was so fun. So fun.
Okay, so I have a great idea.
Wait, hold on really quick. How's your calendar space look, though? Like, are you pretty full for the next couple months?
Not too full.
How about November?
No, I got some openings in November.
21st, right before Thanksgiving?
I think November 21st, I'm wide open. Why? What do you got? Something to
suggest?
I
heard, that just through the, a little bird told me, that the Marine Corps Association is actually hosting a sporting clay shoot for the Marines on the 21st. So I'd mark your calendar if you've got it.
That's awesome. So do you have to be a beginner, or can you be a beginner? You have to be an experienced shooter?
Well, from what I've been told, whether you're a seasoned shooter or a beginner, it's a great way to spend the day outdoors, connect with others, support a cause that makes a difference for Marines. That's huge, right? We're big into supporting causes that help benefit Marines.
I think that's great. And so what are they going to do with the proceeds for this? Is this for charity or?
Well, it actually, it'll stay in house, which is a form of charity. I mean, we are a 501(c)(3).
Yes, we are.
And but it won't it's not going to line my pockets. Like Vic Rubel's not going to the bank with this thing, but it will help support professional development programs that help Marines succeed in their careers and beyond, not just in their careers, beyond their careers.
That's really cool.
It's huge, right?
Can you go as an individual? Do you need to have a team? Do you know how that works?
The way I understand it is there are team spots, there are sponsorship opportunities available, but they will fill up fast. If you are an individual, I just go to McClays. That's MCACLAYS www.givesmart.com. Register, and
That's where you're going to find all
you'll
the details.
You get the info there. Go ahead and register. Sign up. I'm sure it's like golf. If they need a foursome,
Yeah.
they'll add you to the team.
Ooh, that sounds really cool.
I think it's very cool. I love clay shooting. It was a lot of fun. I think this is a great way to give back and to have a great time, like I said, outdoors.
Yeah, it's a great way to spend the day outdoors.
Pull the
and
trigger.
break some clays and get a little time away from the desk. I like it. I'm going to look into that.
Awesome. Let's go. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.